In the peaceful village of Baruma, surrounded by red hills and soft green valleys, there lived a woman named Nari. She wasn't rich, loud, or known for grand things, but deep inside her heart she carried quiet dreams, small but powerful. Nari was the kind of woman whose hands worked magic. With simple herbs from the forest, oils she carefully pressed, and the milk from her neighbors' goats, she created soft, healing soaps that smelled like hope and peace. While others saw just soap, Nari saw the beginning of something bigger. She lived with her husband, Daru, in a small mud brick hut with a straw roof and a tiny garden outside. Daru was a man full of pride, always talking about his timber business and calling himself a big man in the village. He wore flashy clothes, walked with his chest high, and spoke as if he owned the world. He loved to show off, especially at the village square where people gathered to gossip and trade stories. But behind his pride was a man who couldn't see beyond his own nose, especially when it came to his wife's dreams. Every day, Daru mocked Nari's small business. "Look at you," he would sneer, "wasting your time mixing leaves and goat milk. Who do you think will buy your nonsense soap? People want real things, Nari, not rubbish from the backyard." His words were sharp, filled with laughter that cut deeper than a knife. Sometimes he would say it in front of guests, other times while chewing on roasted maize outside their home. Each insult made the neighbors chuckle. Daru loved the attention, even if it came from stepping on his wife's dignity. But Nari never argued. She didn't raise her voice or fight back. Instead, she smiled softly and kept working. In her heart, she whispered, "Every seed starts small, but with time, even the smallest seed becomes a mighty tree." She believed that her little dream, though weak in Daru's eyes, held the power to grow, if she just stayed patient and kept watering it with effort, love, and hope. In the early mornings, while roosters crowed and the sky turned orange, Nari would walk into the forest barefoot, collecting wild herbs with names only old grandmothers remembered. She'd come home, boil water over firewood, and mix her ingredients while humming quietly to herself. Sometimes children would come by, drawn by the sweet scents of lemongrass and cinnamon bark. They'd giggle and ask for samples. Women from nearby huts bought small pieces of soap now and then, not because they believed in it, but because they felt pity. Still, Nari remained hopeful. She wrapped each bar carefully in banana leaves, tied it with twine, and placed it neatly on her small wooden table on market days. Even when she sold nothing, she didn't lose heart. She wiped her sweat, smiled, and whispered to herself, one day, it will happen." Daru, meanwhile, laughed louder each time she returned home with unsold soaps. He didn't just doubt her dream, he insulted it. He saw her work as a joke, a hobby, something beneath his own idea of business. But what he didn't know was that behind every smile Nari wore, there was a fire burning, a quiet fire, strong and steady, waiting for its time to rise. And when it did, the whole village of Baruma would remember the woman whose dream began with herbs, oils, and a heart full of belief. Every morning before the first roosters crow and before the village of Baruma stirred to life, Nari was already awake. With a small woven basket in hand, she would walk barefoot through the dew-kissed grass, heading into the forest where nature whispered its secrets. She knew the forest like an old friend. There she gathered mboga leaves with healing oils, dug out zimbari roots that brought a smooth glow to the skin, and plucked kilo flowers that filled the air with a sweet, calming scent. These weren't just plants to Nari. They were her treasures, her ingredients, her tools for building a dream nobody else could see. Once back home, she lit her small fire stove and gently boiled the herbs. Mixing them with creamy goat milk and pressed oils she extracted herself. She stirred the mixture slowly, with care and love, like a mother tending to her child. Then, she poured it into handmade wooden molds, shaped like shells and flowers. As the soap cooled, a soft fragrance spread through their tiny hut, fresh, warm, and comforting. It smelled like peace. On market days, Nari wrapped each bar in clean banana leaves and walked to Foma Square, carrying a little basket full of her precious creations. Her stall was just a small wooden table, tucked between louder, bigger sellers shouting about their yams and smoked fish. But her space had its own charm. Soft colors, gentle smells, and her warm, welcoming smile. Children were the first to notice. They'd come running, giggling, noses in the air, chasing the scent of kilo flowers. Some would even reach out to touch the smooth soap bars, their eyes wide with wonder. A few women, mostly out of pity or curiosity, would buy 1 or 2 bars. "Let me support her small dream," they'd whisper among themselves. Others simply passed by without a glance. Still, Nari smiled and bowed in thanks, grateful for every coin, every kind word, every glance of interest. But while she saw hope in every little sale, Deru saw nothing but shame. Whenever she returned home with a few coins or unsold bars, he would shake his head in disgust. "You embarrass me, Nari," he'd shout, arms folded. "Do you know how men at the tavern mock me? They say, 'Deru's wife sells flower leaves and goat oil like a witch.'" His words were sharp, filled with bitterness. He didn't understand how a few herbs and milk could ever build anything important. He wanted a wife who would stay silent, cook his food, and admire his business. Not a woman chasing silly dreams with plants and soap. He saw her small business as a joke, a waste of time, a stain on his pride. But Nari, even when her heart stung from his cruelty, never stopped believing. After every insult, she would sit quietly under the moonlight, hands still smelling of herbs, and whisper to herself, "One day, these hands will build more than soap. One day, even the ones who laugh will see." She didn't know when that day would come, or how, but she had faith. And sometimes, that's all a dream needs. A heart strong enough to keep going, even when no one else believes. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Nari's little soap business began to grow, slowly, gently, like a flower blooming in dry soil. More women started coming back to buy her healing bars. Some noticed how their skin felt smoother, how the scent of the soap calmed their minds. Word began to spread in quiet whispers through the village. Yet, with every small step forward, Deru's words grew harsher, colder, and more cutting. Instead of celebrating her progress, Deru only mocked her more. One day, after seeing her count a few coins, he laughed loudly and said, "Maybe you should marry a soap seller then. You don't deserve a man like me." His voice echoed through their little hut, full of venom and pride. Nari stood there, holding her coins tightly, her heart sinking. The man who was supposed to stand beside her had become the loudest enemy of her dreams. Deru didn't stop there. He took her hard-earned money, those few coins she gathered under the sun, standing in the market for hours, and used it to buy palm wine at the local tavern. He bragged to his drinking friends, boasting about how he didn't need to work as hard because his wife sells soap leaves. They all laughed, but their laughter was sharp, filled with mockery, not admiration. Even at home, Deru poisoned the air with his cruel jokes. When guests came over, he would intentionally humiliate her. "Ah, my wife. She now thinks she's a businesswoman. Next thing you know, she'll be teaching the chief how to make soap." Everyone would chuckle, thinking it was harmless teasing. But to Nari, every word was like a stone thrown at her spirit. Worse still, Deru didn't stop at mocking her alone. He discouraged their own children from helping her. When their eldest son tried to help Nari carry her basket to the market one morning, Deru shouted, "Are you a girl now? Do you want to sell flowers like your mother?" The boy hesitated, dropped the basket, and walked away silently, afraid of his father's wrath. Nari's heart broke a little more each day. Sometimes, when no one was watching, her eyes would fill with tears. She'd quietly wipe them away with the corner of her wrapper, not wanting her children to see her sadness. The weight of Deru's words pressed heavy on her chest, but even then, she refused to stop. She continued waking before dawn, collecting herbs, mixing oils, wrapping soaps with care, and setting up her little stall with hope in her heart. Her soul remained steady, unshaken by the storms around her, because deep within her, a voice still whispered, "Don't stop, Nari. Keep going. Your time will come." She held onto that voice like a lifeline, like a thread of light in a dark tunnel, because she knew one thing. No matter how loud Deru laughed, no matter how sharp his insults, her dream was stronger. It was alive, and one day it would rise high enough to silence every mocking word. It was a bright, breezy morning, and Foma Square buzzed with its usual energy, vendors shouting their prices, children running around with roasted corn, and women bargaining over fresh vegetables. Nari sat quietly at her little stall, arranging her handmade soaps neatly on a raffia mat. Each bar looked soft and fresh, wrapped gently in banana leaves and tied with dried grass strings. The aroma of kilo flowers and zimbari roots floated in the air, attracting curious noses. But Nari had no idea that this market day would change her entire life. A sleek black car stopped at the edge of the square, drawing everyone's attention. Out stepped a woman dressed in elegant flowing attire, her presence commanding but graceful. It was Lady Ashari, a well-known merchant from Kambala City, the owner of one of the biggest spa chains in the region. She had come to Buruma in search of raw, natural products for her luxury brand, something pure, authentic, and handmade. As she walked through the market, many sellers called out to her, trying to get her attention. But her steps slowed when she reached Nari's modest stall. Her eyes were drawn to the soft-colored soaps and the peaceful smile on Nari's face. She picked up a bar of soap gently and brought it close to her nose, inhaling deeply. "Who made this?" she asked, her voice firm, yet curious. Nari stood up quickly, nervous, but polite. "I did, Ma," she answered softly, lowering her eyes. Lady Ashari rubbed a little of the soap on her hand, feeling its creamy texture. She smiled, visibly impressed. "This belongs in the city," she said with excitement. "This is not ordinary soap. This is art." In that moment, everything changed. She took Nari's contact details and promised to reach out. Within 3 days, Nari received a call inviting her to Kampala City for a business meeting. She had never been to a big city before, and her heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. She packed her soap samples carefully, wore her best wrapper, and boarded a dusty bus with trembling hands and silent prayers. Back home, when she told Daru about the meeting, he burst into laughter. "You? In Kampala? Don't fool yourself, woman. They'll send you back before sunset." But Daru's laughter didn't last long. When Nari returned, she carried more than just her basket. She came back with a signed contract, one worth 2 million naira. Her handmade soaps were now going to be featured in all of Lady Ashari's spa outlets across Kampala City. She would supply in bulk, every month, with her name and logo on the packaging. Her small business had just become a brand. Daru was speechless. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted between the contract papers and Nari's calm face. He couldn't believe it. The same soap he once called a joke had now made his wife richer than him. The same woman he mocked now sat at the dining table with business brochures and delivery orders. And just like that, everything shifted. The wind had turned, and Nari was no longer just a soap seller. She was a businesswoman, a brand owner, a force. Nari's journey took a new turn the moment she signed that contract. With Lady Ashari's guidance, everything changed. No longer was she just a village woman selling handmade soap. She was now a brand owner. Together, they launched Nari Naturals, a brand that carried the soul of Buruma village, but shined with the polish of a modern business. The logo was simple, a hand holding a flower, but it told a powerful story, natural beauty, made with love and tradition. Ashari didn't just give her a contract, she became a mentor. She taught Nari about packaging, product labeling, branding, and distribution. Nari learned quickly, absorbing everything like a sponge. The old banana leaf wraps were replaced with eco-friendly boxes printed with her brand name. Each product had a story printed on the label, stories of the herbs, the village, and the women who made them. Soon, Nari opened a small production center in Munda town, not far from Buruma. It was a simple building at first, but inside, it was filled with life and purpose. She hired women from her village, widows, single mothers, and young girls who once had no hope. She taught them how to mix oils, shape soaps, and maintain hygiene. She paid fair wages and created a safe working environment. For many, it was their first job, their first taste of independence. She also started a small training program for young girls, teaching them about entrepreneurship, self-worth, and skills. Girls who once spent their days fetching water or working on farms now walked with confidence, holding notebooks and learning how to dream bigger. Within a year, Nari Naturals expanded rapidly. Her soaps, body oils and scrubs reached supermarkets in Kampala and beyond. Luxury spas lined up for her products, praising their organic quality and rich African roots. Export orders began coming in from other countries. The same herbs Daru once mocked, mboga leaves and zimbari roots, were now in demand across borders. Back in Buruma, people started talking differently about Nari. They no longer saw her as the woman with a small stall. They called her Madam Nari, a name spoken with respect and admiration. She was invited to speak at women empowerment events, interviewed on local radio stations, and celebrated as a symbol of resilience and success. Meanwhile, Daru's timber business started to crumble. Demand had dropped, and new government regulations made it harder to operate. His income shrank, his debts grew, and the same men who once laughed with him at the tavern now avoided him. The pride he once wore like a crown was now replaced by frustration and regret. He sat at home most days, watching Nari's delivery trucks go in and out, carrying boxes with her name boldly printed on. The house he once ruled silently echoed with her success, and for the first time, Daru realized he had mocked the very gold growing in his own home. But Nari had no time for revenge. She was too busy building, growing, and changing lives. Because what started as a humble soap business had now become a movement, a brand rooted in tradition, watered by pain, and blooming in purpose. Nari Naturals. Daru's world began to crumble faster than he could understand. His once thriving timber company, Daru Ventures, was no longer the pride of the village. Business slowed down as buyers turned to cheaper alternatives, and new environmental laws tightened restrictions. But Daru, blinded by his ego, refused to adapt. He took out a large loan to expand operations, hoping to prove that he was still a big man. But the deal he was counting on collapsed, and his company spiraled into chaos. Within months, his accounts dried up. The timber piled up, unsold. His suppliers stopped answering his calls. The trucks he had once proudly paraded through Buruma were seized by creditors. Workers who once bowed before him now walked away silently, some even demanding unpaid wages. His business meetings turned into arguments, and his phone calls were filled with threats from lenders. The name Daru Ventures became a whisper of failure in the village. Desperate, Daru ran from one bank to another, pleading for a loan, but the response was the same: rejection. One officer even chuckled and said, "Maybe your soap-selling wife can help you now." The words hit him like a slap. The same Nari he had mocked, insulted, and belittled was now being seen as a savior, while he was seen as a man drowning in his own pride. He couldn't sleep at night. The silence of his once busy office haunted him. He sat in the dark, staring at empty chairs and dusty files. His house grew cold, his kitchen empty, and the respect he once received vanished like smoke. He could no longer afford his own meals, let alone the expensive drinks he once flaunted at the tavern. For the first time, Daru felt what it meant to be truly alone, with nothing but regret. Swallowing the bitter pill of shame, he decided to go back home and beg Nari for help. He rehearsed his words, hoping she would at least listen. He thought maybe, just maybe, she would feel pity. He imagined her sitting by the fire, still in their small hut, maybe even waiting for him to come around. But when he arrived in Buruma, he found out she no longer lived there. Nari had moved into a grand new home, a glass-walled villa in the beautiful Ndemu Hills, overlooking the valley. The same woman he once laughed at now lived in a place most villagers only dreamed of. Her villa stood like a symbol of grace, strength, and quiet victory. Daru stood at the gate, unsure whether to knock or turn away. His hands trembled, not from the wind, but from the weight of his downfall, the echoes of his past words. His cruel laughter, his insults, his pride, now screamed louder in his head than ever before. And in that moment, he realized he had lost more than a business. He had lost his dignity, his respect, and the love of a woman who once only wanted his support. Daru was sitting in his crumbling home when a letter arrived, one that would shake him to his core. His hands trembled as he tore it open, hoping it might be a miracle, maybe a loan approval or a payment offer. But no, it was a business acquisition notice. His beloved company, Daru Ventures, had been officially bought out. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He read the letter again and again. The buyer's name was clear: Nari Naturals, Holdings Limited. His heart stopped for a moment. That was Nari's company. His wife, the same woman he had mocked and humiliated, had just bought everything he once owned. He didn't believe it. He refused to accept it. He stormed out of his house and rushed to the old business site, hoping to see familiar faces, hoping it was all just a nightmare. But the moment he arrived, his mouth went dry. The premises looked different, cleaner, brighter, and more organized than he had ever kept it. The nameplate on the gate had changed. It no longer said Daru Ventures. It read Nari Naturals Timber Division. His footsteps slowed as he walked into the compound, each step heavier than the last. Workers he once bossed around now greeted him politely but distantly. Some even smiled awkwardly, as if trying to hide their amusement. He pushed open the office door, the same one he once walked through with swagger, and what he saw left him frozen. There she was, Nari, seated gracefully behind the desk he used to call his throne. But this time, she wasn't the gentle, timid woman he used to scold. She was dressed in a sharp, elegant power suit. Her posture was firm, her expression calm and in control. There was no trace of the woman who once cried quietly in corners, only a strong, confident businesswoman who now ruled the very empire he lost. She looked up and smiled, not the soft, submissive smile he once knew, but a powerful, poised one. "Hello, Mr. Daru," she said calmly, her voice steady like a quiet storm. "I see you've received the letter." Daru could barely speak. His lips moved, but no words came out. His pride shattered into pieces. He stood there like a statue, unable to process what was happening. Nari continued, "You're welcome to stay and work under me, if you can behave professionally." Her words hit him like thunder. The same man who once laughed at her small soap-making business now stood in front of her, powerless and humbled. He had become what he once feared most, an employee begging for relevance in the world he once ruled. And Nari? She didn't seek revenge. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult him. She simply rose higher, with dignity, grace, and quiet strength. The very things he once called weakness had become her greatest weapons. And now, the whole village whispered not about Daru's downfall, but about Nari's rise. The Baruma Annual Festival was the most anticipated event of the year, a time when the entire village came together to celebrate progress, culture, and excellence. This year, the air buzzed with excitement more than ever before. People whispered and murmured about one thing. Nari, the once overlooked woman, had now become the pride of Baruma, and everyone waited to see her honored. Colorful canopies were raised, dancers filled the stage, and the village square was packed with people from near and far. Drums echoed through the air, and the sweet smell of roasted yam and spice stew drifted from the food stalls. The chief of Baruma, dressed in his royal regalia, stood tall at the podium. In his hand was a golden plaque, the Queen of Enterprise Award, the highest recognition for business excellence in the region. As the chief began his speech, he spoke not of foreign investors or political leaders. He spoke of a woman who had turned herbs and oils into an empire. He spoke of Nari, the soap maker turned business mogul. The villagers cheered as her name echoed across the square. Children chanted her name, women ululated in joy, and men clapped with pride. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Nari walked onto the stage, gracefully dressed in a flowing gold gown with traditional embroidery. She looked radiant, not just in appearance, but in confidence. The crowd erupted into applause, rising to their feet to honor her. And somewhere in the middle of that crowd stood Daru. His eyes were dull, his posture slouched, his once arrogant presence now reduced to that of a shadow. He clapped slowly, his hands trembling, not from excitement, but from shame. The same hands that once dismissed her work now clapped for her glory. The same mouth that once mocked her now remained shut in humiliation. People who once laughed at Nari's small stall now pushed forward to take selfies with her, to shake her hand, to give speeches about her brilliance. Even old traders who once ignored her now claimed they had always believed in her potential. The hypocrisy was loud, but the celebration was louder. A young reporter from a city magazine stepped forward with a microphone. Cameras flashed. "Madame Nari," she said cheerfully, "you're now one of the most successful entrepreneurs in this region. What inspired you to start this journey?" Nari smiled warmly and looked out at the sea of faces. Then, without bitterness or anger, her eyes gently paused on one person, Daru. "Being underestimated," she said, her voice clear and calm, "was the fire I needed to rise." The crowd burst into applause again, but Daru stood frozen. Her words struck him harder than any insult ever could. She had not taken revenge. She had not humiliated him with anger or insults. Instead, she stood tall with grace, letting her success speak louder than anything else. And that day, under the glowing sun and cheering crowd, everyone saw the truth. The woman once mocked had become the woman everyone admired, while the man who once ruled with pride now sat in silence, clapping for the queen he never believed in. Months passed, and Daru's life continued to spiral downward. He was no longer the man he used to be, no longer the boastful husband who mocked his wife's dreams, no longer the big man of Baruma. He had become just another employee in a company that used to bear his name, a company now owned and run by the very woman he had once belittled. But even that small position didn't last long. One afternoon, the company accountant noticed something unusual, small amounts of cash missing from petty funds. At first, it seemed like an error, but after a thorough internal investigation, the truth came out. Daru had been secretly stealing money from the company, just a few notes here and there, maybe out of desperation, maybe out of pride, refusing to ask for help, but it was theft nonetheless. When the report reached Nari's desk, everyone expected a storm. Some said she would humiliate him in front of the staff. Others believed she would drag him to court. But Nari did none of that. Instead, she called him into her office, the same office he once ruled from. She looked calm, dressed in a simple yet elegant blue suit. Daru stood before her, unable to meet her eyes. The silence between them was heavy, awkward. "You've been caught stealing from the company, Daru," she said softly. "You know the rule." Daru's head dropped in shame. He had no words, no excuses left. He didn't even beg. Deep inside he knew he had finally hit rock bottom. But what happened next shocked everyone. Nari didn't shout. She didn't insult him. She simply signed his dismissal letter, handed it to him, and stood up. "I'm letting you go," she said gently. "Not because I want revenge, but because this company stands for integrity." Daru's eyes welled up. He expected anger, but her calmness crushed him more than any harsh word could. As he turned to leave, she added one last thing, her voice soft but firm. "I hope you find yourself again, like I did. Only this time, try not to laugh at the wrong person." That sentence echoed in Daru's heart long after he left the building. He walked out slowly, his shoulders heavy with regret. The same road that once led him to power had now become a path of reflection and remorse. Meanwhile, Nari's journey continued to soar. Nari Naturals expanded beyond borders, reaching major cities across Africa. Her story became a case study in business schools. Her face appeared in magazines, and her brand became a symbol of strength, heritage, and perseverance. People across the continent spoke of the woman who turned soap into gold, the woman who rose from ridicule to royalty. And through it all, Nari remained humble, never forgetting the village of Baruma or the hands that once molded herbs in a small stall. Karma had indeed turned the tables, but Nari didn't celebrate her husband's fall. Instead, she rose above it, proving that true strength isn't just in success, but in the grace with which you handle those who once tried to break you. In the quiet stillness of the final scene, the story settles like a warm breeze over the village of Baruma. A place once filled with whispers of mockery and doubt had now become the birthplace of an inspiring legacy. The journey of Nari wasn't just about soap. It was about faith, endurance, and silent strength that spoke louder than any insult ever could. As gentle music plays in the background, the narrator's voice rises with calm wisdom. The words, though simple, carry deep weight. Never laugh at someone's humble beginning. You don't know what seed is planted in that quiet struggle. What seems small today might grow roots so deep, it shakes the very ground beneath you tomorrow. Dreams don't need loud noise to grow, just patience, belief, and a little light from within. Daru once thought his wife's efforts were nothing but foolishness. He saw her stall as a joke, her handmade soaps as a waste of time, but he failed to see the spark in her eyes, the purpose in her hands, and the quiet fire in her heart. In his pride, he forgot that time has a way of turning tides, and life always rewards the one who keeps going even when no one claps. Nari Naturals was not just a business, it was a symbol, a testimony that no dream is too small, no vision too weak. It reminded everyone that success doesn't always wear a suit and tie. It can wear a simple wrapper and walk barefoot to the market, but it shines all the same. Nari never shouted back. She never tried to prove herself with words. She let her work speak, her results echo, and her growth shout louder than any insult ever could. And in the end, the tables turned, not with revenge, but with grace. She rose, not by stepping on others, but by lifting herself, even when the weight of discouragement pulled her down. As the narrator's voice draws to a close, there's one final message, one that lingers in the heart of every listener. The person you laugh at today could become the very person you depend on tomorrow. So respect every journey, no matter how small it seems, because greatness often wears the face of struggle before it glows with success. And so, that's how the woman who was mocked, insulted, and pushed aside became the boss of her own husband. Because dreams don't die when laughed at, they grow stronger. And that's the story of Nari, the woman who turned soap into success and silence into strength. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect. How many dreams have we laughed at just because they looked too small? How many people have we judged before knowing their full story? Nari's journey is a reminder that true strength lies in quiet resilience, in never giving up, and in believing in yourself, even when no one else does. So, if you've ever felt overlooked, mocked, or underestimated, remember, your time will come. Keep building, keep rising, keep dreaming. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who needs hope, courage, or just a reason to keep going, please share this video with them. Let it remind them that no beginning is too small and no dream is too silly. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment about what inspired you the most, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-touching stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means everything. Keep believing, keep shining, and always remember, every seed has the power to become a tree.